Well, good morning, everyone. This is George Spees with the Pennsylvania Office of Open Records. I'd like to welcome you to this morning's webinar where we're going to be discussing basics of the Pennsylvania Sunshine Act, or what's also known as Pennsylvania's meeting law. A couple preliminaries here before we dive into the topic itself. First, this session is, if you're familiar with how we do these, it's PowerPoint based with me talking in the background. The PowerPoint is available on our website so that if you'd want to download it for future reference or maybe use it for training locally or whatever, you're welcome to do that. You go to our website, go over to the training tab, click on that and go down, and I think it's either on a sub page or the main page where you can find all of the PowerPoints that we use for these webinars. And like I said, you're welcome to download them for free, make your own copies or whatever, and use them as you feel the need. This session is also being recorded on Teams. So if also you'd like a copy of that recording, again, for possible future reference, or maybe you've got some colleagues who couldn't make it this morning because of their busy schedules, you can send an email or reach out to our office, and they'll provide you a link through a file sharing service that would allow you to access the recording. Now, some systems have security features built into them that don't allow access to file sharing software. If that's the case with you, again, reach out to our office. What I recommend is mail us a flash drive um, with a self-addressed stamped return envelope and a note indicating what session you'd like a recording of. And then the staff here would be happy to copy the recording over and mail it back to you, and you're good to go. Okay, as we go through the session today, if you have questions, you can type them in the meeting chat feature, and I will do my best to answer them as we're proceeding, as we're going through live. But I have two favors to ask you. First is, we're talking about the Sunshine Act, so I think it's important that we stay on topic, okay? I realize there's a lot of things on your plate, and you may have questions. If it's not about the Sunshine Act, reach out to our office again. And there are administrative staff who can help you out, get you pointed in the right direction. But this morning, Sunshine Act. Usually it's not a problem, but I like to say that. Also, if you can keep your questions as brief and as succinct as possible, that helps because sometimes folks will type in several paragraphs, uh, and it's just awkward for me to sit here and try and read through it while everyone else is waiting patiently. Um, if by chance it looks like you've got an unusually complex situation or something completely unique to your situation, we'll do one of two things. We'll wait until the end of the presentation and I'll come back to it and we'll try to address it then, or we'll take the conversation offline. The phone number for the office, the URL for the website, they're on the screen right now. And we're happy to have you call in or email us, and we'll get back to you quickly. Response, get things sorted out. Okay. Also, I need to apologize in advance. For the last several weeks, I've been dealing with a bit of a cold and a cough. I'm getting better every day, but still, it just seems to be hanging on. But 'tis the season. Okay, so if suddenly I mute the mic or whatever, it's because I'm having a coughing spasm, or otherwise I'll just apologize in advance here for whatever. Okay, let's get all that out of the way now and dive right into the topic, the Sunshine Act. Why is the Sunshine Act important? Um, well, let me start by quoting briefly from the act itself. There's kind of a preamble in there, and it's The right of the public to be present at all meetings of agencies and to witness the deliberation, policy formulation, and decision-making of agencies is vital to the enhancement and proper functioning of the democratic process, that secrecy in public affairs undermines the faith of the public in government and the public's effectiveness in fulfilling its role in a democratic society. Okay, rather high-sounding words there, but when you cut to the chase, having open meetings, having, that word sunshine in there, to allow the public to observe and participate in the workings of its government, I think cuts to the heart of what a democracy is truly about. And it's when we find our public officials operating in secret that usually bad things are happening. So by opening up the process, making it a fundamental right of every citizen to observe their elected officials in the decision-making process is paramount to having trust in what our government is in fact doing. Now, I like to say that there are three basic tenets of the Sunshine Act, and that's what we're going to cover here this morning. The first is the requirement that there be advance notice of all public meetings and instructions on how I attend. And that may apply to, the physical component of the meeting as well as any online presence that the agency might have. And when I use the term agency, I'm talking about, state departments, boards, commissions, as well as local government, which would include cities, boroughs, townships, school districts, authorities, and the like. All of those entities that are subject to the Sunshine Act. The public also has a right to observe elections. And again, that applies to the live meeting as well as any online component. And then they have a right to comment prior to decisions being made, okay? So that we're going to talk about the agenda thing going on. Okay, Amanda cannot hear me. Not really sure how to deal with that. I would suggest that she log out and log in again. That usually takes care of it. Okay, there we go. Good. All right. So, we're going to talk about public comment. Okay, Mike is cutting in and out. Not sure why. I'm going to move a little closer to it. Hopefully that'll take care of the problem. Okay. Yeah, so the public has a right to comment on decisions that the agency is going to make prior to those decisions being made. Okay, again, all part of the democratic process. And we'll talk about each one of these components, as well as other aspects of the Sunshine Act in greater detail as we proceed through. Okay, is my voice coming through better now? I'm speaking a little louder and I moved closer to the mic, so hopefully that helped. Can someone confirm that we're okay, or is it still cutting in and out? Okay, everyone seems happy now. All right, sorry about that, and I'm glad it's worked out. Okay, moving up. Let's talk about who is covered. And like I said, any state or local government body and all committees. Now, let me emphasize here that when it comes to analyzing or figuring out what a law is all about, you'll want to read the text of the law itself, and you don't want to skip the definition section, because my experience is that if there is vague or, what appears to be conflicting language in the law itself, you can usually go to the definition section, and that provides clarity. So within the definition section of the Sunshine Act, there is, what is an agency? And, here it is, state or local government body, and it's included in there, and that's why I have it italicized, all committees, because that question comes up an awful lot. Is our committee covered by the Sunshine Act? Must we open up these gatherings to the public? And I'm I'm going to say it depends, and we'll walk through it. So reading the definition of the act, this is where we're at here. A committee, the purpose of what we're doing now is to answer the question, is our committee subject to the Sunshine Act? Well, the first question we need to answer is it performing an essential government function? And maybe you're thinking, well, why wouldn't a committee be performing an essential government function? It's because, occasionally we put together groups to do things that are not what we would consider vitally important. Okay, and let me give you a quick example here. Our local girls softball team has won the state championship. Okay, it's quite an accomplishment. And council has decided, well, we need to acknowledge this. We need to have a celebration. So perhaps there's going to be a parade, and then we're going to gather at the borough park and recognize this accomplishment of the team. All right. So we appoint a group of citizens to organize this parade and celebration. Now, we have to answer the question, is this an essential government function? Well, the answer is probably not, okay? There's nothing statutory that says if your girls softball team wins the state championship, you have to have a parade, all right? Rather, it is simply government officials celebrating the accomplishments of their citizens, the girls softball team. Okay, so chances are that ad hoc committee and their gatherings would not be subject to the Sunshine Act. But let's change it up a little bit. Let's say that there is a standing committee appointed by council to annually review all ordinances to ensure that they're relevant, that the language is consistent with all state or federal statutes that may also be related, that there's still, a need for these statutes to be in place, these ordinances to be in place, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. There, I think you could argue that it is an essential government function that all of our laws, all of our statutes, all of our ordinances be relevant, germane, up to date, whatever. Okay. So you could argue that the gatherings of that standing committee would be subject to the Sunshine Act. Then we come up to the next component of this exercise, and we have to answer the question, are the committees exercising authority to take official action? And when we look at the Sunshine Act, and again, we're back in this definition section, we're going to find that official action is in fact defined. And one of the components of that definition is making recommendations. Okay, so then we have to look at, is our committee making recommendations back to the elected board? If so, that's official action and thus satisfies this component of the definition of whether or not the committee would be subject to opening it up to Sunshine. Now, you're thinking, well, why wouldn't you have a committee making recommendations back to the board? And it can be multifaceted. Unfortunately, sometimes when you've got a board and a topic comes up and there is no obvious solution, or you want to avoid possible action because it may create, upheaval within the organization, one of the best things you can do is assign it to a committee and have it go away. The committee may never even meet, okay, at any point in the future. But it's, an easy way to avoid making a decision is, well, we'll appoint it to a committee. And that committee is never heard from again. The topic goes away, whatever. If by chance that committee would meet, there's a very good chance that it wouldn't be subject to Sunshine because it has not been tasked with coming back to us with a recommendation. Also, on a more productive vein, you could appoint a committee where the sole purpose is to gather information. Okay, we want you to come back to us, not with any recommendations. Okay, we'll make the decision, okay, based on the information that your committee has gathered for the main board to analyze and in turn make a decision as to what we're going to do. All right, we don't want your recommendation. We just want the information so that we can make an educated, informed decision. In that particular case, where the purpose of the committee is to gather information and not so much to make a recommendation, the chances are very good that that gathering of that particular committee, again, would not be subject to the Sunshine Act because they're not conducting official action in the form of making recommendations back to the elected board. All right. That may sound as clear as mud, or it may be clear to you as to why that committee would not be subject to the Sunshine Act versus the other one that is. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay, let's move on though, because there is case law involving committees that sheds a little more light on this. Okay, so we're going beyond what the act itself says and looking at the analysis of the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Court based on a decision that took place a couple decades ago. The decision is called Ristow, someone's last name, versus Casey, who was Governor Robert Casey at the time. And there was a gathering of public officials. Mr. Ristow took exception to that and went through the exercise of filing a complaint in court. And this is the Commonwealth Court actually ruled in favor of Governor Casey, but in their decision, they included some helpful commentary that we use up to this day when providing recommendations as to whether or not a committee would be subject to the Sunshine Act. So the first thing the court looked at was, does the committee have decision-making authority? And this kind of goes back to that definition section of the Sunshine Act. And again, you can have some committees that are purely tasked with information gathering. Okay, they have no decision-making authority. Then the court asked the question, are the members of the committee appointed by the board, and are they authorized to act on the board's behalf? All right, well, you're thinking, why wouldn't you have a committee that's where they're appointed by the board? Well, it so happens you can have standing committees that are what I would call self-perpetuating. I'll use the example of a local public library, where initially, when the library board was formed, yes, the members were appointed by the elected officials. However, if a vacancy occurs on the board, it doesn't go back to the elected officials to select the person to fill the vacancy. Rather, it's the authority of the library board to find a new member. Okay, and there's no approval by the elected officials. So you would realize here that the board, because it is self-appointed, are not appointed by the elected board, which removes them from Sunshine Act. Okay? And understand that these criteria build upon each other. Okay, all of them must be present in order to determine whether or not the meetings, the gatherings, would be covered by the Sunshine Act. No, I'm not moving away from the microphone, so I'm not sure what the volume issue is here, but I'll try and speak loudly so everyone can hear. And we'll try and solve this here before the next webinar. All right. Then we have to answer the next question, which I think is critical to what the court is honing in on here. Are the recommendations pursuant to statute, ordinance, or regulatory authority whereby the making or enactment of laws, policies, or regulation is the end result. Okay, and I think this really cuts to the chase, because what the court is saying here is that if you have a committee and it's making recommendations back to the elected board, are those recommendations based on statute? Okay, or law, to paraphrase here. Because let's go back to our example with the girls softball team. The committee may very well come back to the elected board and say, okay, this is what we want for the parade route. This is who we're suggesting you invite, the local fire companies, the school bands, et cetera, et cetera. And, this is, we're going to sell barbecue chicken or whatever. Okay. And the board then decides, well, yeah, we're going to accept your recommendations or, maybe amend them or whatever. Okay. So you have this discourse where they are making recommendations back to the elected board, but then you have to answer the question, is there any law that says we have to do this? And you're not going to find, at least to my knowledge, you're not going to find any statute in Pennsylvania, whether it be state or local, that says if the girls softball team wins the state championship, this is how you celebrate. So again, going back to my previous example, the gatherings of that ad hoc committee for the girls softball team celebration would not be subject to the Sunshine Act because it has no basis in law. All right. But if you do have a committee that is making recommendations back to the board or acting on the board's behalf, and you can make that nexus between what the board is tasked with, what its mission is, and an appropriate statute or ordinance, then you can successfully argue that it is covered by the Sunshine Act, and their gatherings would be open to public observation and scrutiny. Okay, now we've covered a lot of territory here, both with the definitions of the act and this case law, Ristow versus Casey. And understand, there's not a lot of case law with the Sunshine Act. Okay, there's not a lot of litigation when it comes to the Sunshine Act. So, what we rely on is somewhat limited here. If anything, if you encounter this question, is our committee covered? And, based on your own analysis, you're still not sure. My recommendation is to lean towards transparency. When in doubt, open up your meetings. Now, it may prove inconvenient. Okay, it may require more paperwork, scheduling issues, and the like. Okay, but the alternative is that if you fail to open up your meeting, someone could file a complaint, and you could end up before a judge, and you have to pass what I call the straight face test, where you have to explain with a straight face why you didn't open up your meeting. And, I don't know what your experience is with judges, but, you catch them on a bad day and you could be subject to some serious sanctions under the Sunshine Act. So I think, just from a cost benefit analysis, it's going to be easier to open up your meetings to public scrutiny rather than take that chance, if you're unsure, that we're not going to open up our meeting and ultimately end up subject to sanctions, which we'll talk about towards the end of the presentation. Okay, question has popped up. If the formed committees do not constitute a quorum, does all of this that you've discussed apply? That's an excellent question, and it comes down to what you think a quorum is. There is a mistaken assumption that for a committee to be subject to the Sunshine Act, it must have a quorum of elected officials that make up the committee. That is not the case. You could have a committee with no elected officials on it, and it is still subject to the Sunshine Act. Okay, you do not need a quorum of elected officials in order to be subject to the Sunshine Act. Now, what if you have a committee, though, and a quorum of the committee does not show up? Well, then you cannot conduct official business. So it's not really a meeting under the definition of the Sunshine Act. And you happen to be, I think you're one slide ahead of me, but it's an excellent question. Okay, so lean towards transparency. Now, getting to Sharon's question, we have to answer the question, is it in fact a meeting? And sure enough, is there a quorum? Okay. Now, given what I just said about elected officials, it doesn't apply here. Okay. It depends on whether we're talking about the elected board or potentially a committee appointed by the elected board, which may or may not have elected officials as part of that committee. Members can phone in, okay, meaning that if you have, in order to, and there are some exceptions to this, which I'll cover here, but you've got a quorum present and one of the members wants to phone in because, maybe they're on vacation, maybe they're out of town on business or whatever. They can do that as long as everyone can hear the person phoning in and the person phoning in can hear everyone else. Meaning, whether it be a conference call or an online meeting or whatever, but you cannot have like someone sitting in the conference room on a cell phone relaying back and forth with the guy who's phoning in. Okay, you have to have that direct communication, no go-between. Now, as far as a quorum being physically present, under, let me think here, under the first class township code and the borough code, you must first have a quorum physically present before you can conduct business, and everyone above and beyond that can phone in if that's what they have to do. Okay, so quorum must be physically present, and then everyone beyond that, above and beyond the quorum, can then phone in. For like a second-class township, or a city or a school district authority or whatever, there you can have a person phone in order to meet the quorum. Okay, you recognize the difference there. Then we come up to the second question. Is there deliberation? Again, we go back to the definition section. Deliberation is any discussion that could lead to a decision. Okay, so if you're talking about agency business, it is deliberation. Now, occasionally we'll get a phone call or an email. Hey, I saw 3 of our township supervisors at the restaurant the other morning having breakfast together. That's illegal, isn't it? Well, no, it isn't. They can meet, talk about their families. They can talk about their weather. They can talk about the girls' softball team. They just can't talk about township business, okay, because that would be deliberation. And that would be potentially an illegal gathering. Okay, but if they're not talking about township business, it's okay. So you could have, your township supervisors participating in the parade and gathering at the girls softball team celebration, as long as they're not talking about any other township business. It's okay. So then we have to answer the next question. Is there decision making? Well, decision making is a vote, okay? Based on who you have there. It's coming to the conclusion that this is the course of action we're going to take. Everybody in favor, okay? That's a decision. Or if it is a public meeting, decision making is more official in the form of, motion, second, discussion, vote. Okay, but that would constitute decision making. And then just as an aside, I want to warn you about email meetings. This usually happens in January when you've got a new board being seated, a lot of new members. And the person elected chairperson, usually, they come from a business background and they've decided, well, it would be a lot easier if we could just take care of some of this business by email. Okay, that's how we do it at work. So I'm just going to send out an email and say, this is what we want to do. Let me know your thoughts. Okay, number one, it's deliberation because you are discussing agency business. Number two, it's decision making because you're asking people their thoughts. You have violated the Sunshine Act by doing so. Now, there is a threshold where we distinguish between official action and administrative action. Okay, it is okay to have email discussions on administrative level issues. It is not okay to have email discussions on matters that could lead to official action or what we would call perhaps policy level decision making. Now, what is administrative action? How do we distinguish that? Well, a good way to define it is that the official decision has already been made. Okay, let's say that at last month's public meeting, the board voted to take official action on a particular matter of business. Okay, but it didn't cover all of, it didn't dot all the I's and cross all the T's. Now we got to figure out, how do we implement what the board voted on? Okay, that's administrative action, and that is okay to discuss via email. Let's say you appoint a committee, okay, to oversee some facet of borough business. Okay, but when are they going to meet? Who's going to serve on this, et cetera, et cetera? That's administrative because the official action has already taken place in the form of a public vote. The administrative action has yet to be resolved so that we can take care of by email. Okay, you see how all that works, okay? So just beware of email meetings. I'm not saying you can't have them. I'm just saying be careful about the level of issues that you discuss using email or any other form of non-public communication. Moving on here. Well, what is not a meeting? Yeah, I just talked about the one, administrative action versus agency business. Then you can have what are called work sessions, okay? And usually, I think the best example are school districts because they routinely have work sessions. Once a month, they'll have their public business meeting, but then let's say also once a month, they'll also have a work session. A work session is where the communication is one way. Okay, the board gathers and they listen to reports provided by the superintendent, assistant superintendent, principals, cast of thousands, typical school district. But it's for purposes of education so that the board, when it comes time for the business meeting, they can make an informed decision on whatever it is that they're being asked to vote on. Now, a board member can ask the person providing the report questions, and there can be discussion back and forth. But what cannot happen is the board members discussing the merits of the presentation or the issue amongst themselves, because that's deliberation. Remember, we're talking about agency business. So you can have, and if let's say you're a borough, so council meets, the borough manager provides a report or an update on issues. Maybe the police chief provides an update, maybe the fire chief, whatever. Okay, but the board members cannot discuss issues like that amongst themselves. Communication is one way between individual board members and the person providing the information. Otherwise, it would be deliberation. Then is there decision making? And this is an extension. Remember, this is an extension of deliberation. Or is the board in their gathering making decisions? If so, That's official action, which should be before the public, a public meeting. Okay, so make sure that all of these dots are ticked off before you have a gathering that you've determined does not rise to the definition of a meeting under the Sunshine Act. Okay, administrative action, communication being one way, no deliberation, no decision making, and you should be all right. Okay, let's talk about public notice, the first leg of the stool here. Under the Sunshine Act, the agency must provide at least 3 days advance notice of the first regular meeting of the year, and then at least 3 days advance notice of all remaining regular meetings. So usually what happens is they take out a legal notice in the local newspaper, and they put the date for what is usually called the organizational meeting per the appropriate code. Then 3 days later, the board meets, and they either confirm that we're going to continue to meet, whenever, the first Tuesday of the month or something like that, or maybe there's a scheduling conflict. So they decide, well, we have to change it, and we're going to meet the first Thursday of every month. If that's the case, then you need to provide a second legal notice informing the public that you're changing the date of the regular meeting. And you pull out your calendar and you mark every date that the first Thursday falls on, and that becomes part of your legal notice. Now, it has to be a legal notice in a paid newspaper of general circulation. Okay, newspaper articles don't count, what typically are called puff pieces. If you put it on your website, that's a good thing, but it doesn't meet the legal requirement. So, use whatever social media you have to get the message out there as to when your meetings are going to be. But it still must be a paid newspaper of general circulation, which eliminates those sales circulars that show up in your mailbox 2 or 3 days a week. Okay, that's not a paid newspaper, so it doesn't count. And it must also be posted at the meeting site, the dates that the meetings are going to occur. Okay, question has popped up. Is that a minimum of 3 days in advance? Yes, Dawn, it's got to be. And in so doing, you've got to also keep in mind that the newspaper is going to need lead time before they publish. It has to be published 3 days in advance of the regular meeting. And, I realize that this is becoming more difficult as we see structural changes in the news media business. Okay. I mean, the Harrisburg newspaper used to be twice daily. Now I think it's down to 3 days a week. Okay. It becomes harder to publish these legal notices, but until the law is changed, this is what the law says, and we must follow it. Okay. And then also, like I said, posted at the meeting site. Now, these are for regular meetings of the board. The Sunshine Act does allow you to have special meetings, which have not been previously scheduled. Let's say some issue comes up that can't wait until next month's regular meeting. So we've decided we're going to have a special meeting. All of the same criteria apply, except now the 3 days advance notice drops down to 24 hours. As long as it's published a minimum of, a minimum of 24 hours in advance of the special meeting, you're okay. The Sunshine Act also allows you to have emergency meetings where there is no notification requirement. Just be careful not to try and create your own emergency, okay, so that in order to avoid meeting the requirements of the Sunshine Act. Never try to outthink a law, okay, because ultimately you're going to get called on it. You're going to get caught. And this is, my experience in the years that I've been doing this, is that when someone intentionally tries to subvert the purpose of the Sunshine Act, sometimes by, couching it as an emergency meeting, when there's not a true emergency, you're going to get caught. And you're going to face that straight face test that I detailed earlier, where you have to stand before a judge and explain why you thought it was an emergency when in fact maybe it really wasn't. But let's say that we're a small borough. We have one snowplow, it's an old plow. It's on its last legs. Sure enough, it blew a cylinder, or yeah, blew a cylinder. Okay. And the forecast says there's a big storm on the way. We need a new plow. We need it right now. There's one sitting on the lot down the road. We need to buy it. Okay. Emergency meeting to approve the purchase of a snowplow. Okay. We can do that. Okay. That's a bona fide emergency. We don't need to post notification. We don't need advance notice. We'll explain it later to everybody. Okay. And then finally, there's no notification requirement if you have to cancel a meeting, like say someone gets sick and you can't make a quorum, whatever. But if there's any way you can get the word out that you're canceling the meeting, please do so. Use your social media to get the word out, because there's nothing more frustrating to a citizen that plans to attend a public meeting and they show up and there's crickets. Okay. All the lights are out. There's nothing posted on the door, whatever, nothing on social media. They find out the next day that the meeting was in fact canceled. Okay. That really upsets people. And we get the calls and we tell them, yeah, it would have been nice if they would have notified everybody, but they didn't violate the law by not doing so. Okay, questions have popped up here. With newspapers moving away from paper copies, is there any talk of allowing website posting being sufficient? Yeah, but it's only talk. And if you feel strongly about it, I would suggest reaching out to your state legislator and letting them know of your concerns about, the whole posting requirements of the Sunshine Act, and seeing if, there's anything that they would be willing to do with updating the Sunshine Act to reflect these structural changes in the newspaper industry. Okay. Beyond that, there's always talk about updating laws and whether or not it gains any traction and it's going to come out of committee or whatever. I just can't predict that. Sometimes we get notified 3, sometimes 4 days in advance that, hey, we're going to run this bill. What do you guys think? And we comment on it, provide the best expertise we can. We're happy to see a lot of these changes, but the best thing I can advise you at this point is reach out to your rep, let them know of your concerns. Okay, let's talk about agendas, because this is a somewhat newer aspect of the Sunshine Act that was passed a couple years ago. And it requires that all agencies must post an agenda of issues to be deliberated on or planned official action at least 24 hours in advance of the public meeting. Okay, this has nothing to do with the posting requirements. Okay, it only deals with the agenda. And this was resulted from complaints that people had about agencies, about boards running business through and nobody knowing about it beforehand. So now the requirement is at least 24 hours prior to a public meeting, an agenda of the business that's going to be conducted at that meeting must be posted. And this involves all regular and those special meetings, in case you have any of those. Would not include work sessions, conferences, and executive sessions. And by the way, we're going to talk about executive sessions real soon here. So it requires postings must be on your websites. And there are some agencies that don't have their websites, but they use like Facebook or other social media as their primary outreach. If that's the case, then it must be posted on your Facebook page, the agenda. You also must have it posted at your agency office and at your meeting site available. And then you must have copies available at the meeting itself for people who are attending. Okay, questions popped up here. Is it required to post exhibits along with the agenda? Usually not, but the question comes up, well, how detailed does our agenda need to be? Yeah, it just popped up on the screen here. Good question. And the Sunshine Act doesn't address it, okay? It doesn't say how specific it needs to be. So I go back to what I call the common sense test. And it's kind of related to that straight face test that I mentioned earlier. Picture this. If you are a local resident and you're reading the agenda, it should be detailed enough that a reasonable person can figure out what it is you're going to be dealing with at the public meeting. Okay, so if you just say, we're going to be talking about expenses, well, that doesn't really tell me anything. Okay, what expenses? Okay, what line items, what issues, what is the topic of the expenses that you're going to be talking about? Okay, a reasonable person can figure out, based on the detail or description that you provide, what it is they're going to be talking about in a public meeting so that they can decide whether or not it's worth attending or not. Okay, that to me, if I were a borough manager or a township manager putting together my agenda, that would tell me how specific it needs to be. Okay, what would a reasonable person glean from what I've written down? Hopefully that, provides some help there. Okay, so it needs to be posted on your website, agency offices, meeting sites, and available at the meeting itself at least 24 hours in advance. Now, we can change agendas. So let's go through this. Does this apply to water sewer authority? Yes. Okay, based on the municipal code. Or the municipal authorities code. All right. What if we need to change the agenda? Okay, let's run through the timeline here. Well, anything in advance of 24 hours, you can do whatever you want. Okay, you can change it as you see fit. Once the 24-hour threshold hits, okay, you're limited in what you can change. You can only do what are legally defined as de minimis changes, where there would be no expenditure in funds or entering into a contract by the topics that we would add to the agenda. Okay. Then we hit the meeting itself. The meeting is adjourned and called to order. What if an issue comes up that we feel we need to make a decision tonight? Okay. You have a couple options here. First offhand, if a member of the public brings something up and they think, I think we should vote on this evening, or I think you should vote on this evening, you don't have to. Okay, you can defer it to a future meeting. Okay, you're under no obligation to do what a member of the public says, or less than a quorum of the board is urging you to do. You can say, well, let's talk about this at a future meeting and add it to that agenda. But if you decide this is of sufficient import that we should vote on this tonight, this is what you need to do. First is that the board must vote to amend the agenda, okay, by majority action. And you would do that just as you would any other business item. It's, I make a motion, we amend the agenda, second, discussion, and then vote. Okay, because that memorializes it as official action, which must be included in the minutes. And in your discussion and in the motion, you provide a reason why you are amending the agenda. And it's because, well, this issue has come up and we feel we need to vote on it tonight. Okay, and then you would go through the normal, whatever the business item is. Again, you make a second motion, second discussion, or maybe you decide not to vote, but at least you amended the agenda to reflect the deliberation that would take place. Because remember, the agenda reflects items not only that you vote on, but also those that you discussed. So maybe as a result of the discussion, you decide, well, no, we don't need to vote, or we're not going to vote tonight. But it would still be memorialized in the minutes of the meeting. Okay, so you've amended the agenda that you had previously posted. The act says that you now must post that amended agenda within 24 hours. And again, that would be on your websites, at the business office, at the meeting place. Then the question comes up, well, how long does it need to be posted? The law doesn't say. Okay, but since, okay, and this is George talking here, not the Office of Open Records, not any legal authority. This is just, my logic here, which may be a judge may disagree with, but until a judge does disagree, this is what I'm recommending, is that you keep the amended agenda posted for 24 hours, because there seems to be a theme in this act where the agenda is posted 24 hours in advance and an amended agenda needs to be posted within 24 hours. So let's just go ahead and say it needs to be posted for 24 hours before you take it down and move on with your business. Like I said, this is not in the act. There's no court language that confirms this. It's just George from the Office of Open Records saying this is what he thinks. It's my free advice, and you know what free advice is worth, okay? So, yeah, everything needs to be memorialized in the minutes. Let's move on. Public comment. Okay, now, in the last session I did on this, the question was asked, does public comment apply to state agencies? And I mistakenly said, yes, it does. But then in follow-up discussion, I ended up doing some research, going back to the law, and it's not so much what the law says, it's what the law doesn't say. And the law does not mention in the public comment provisions state agencies. It does mention local agencies, which would be cities, boroughs, townships, school districts, authorities, and the like, just not state agencies. So state agencies get a pass on this. But the second leg of, I guess we're at the third leg. The third leg says that all public meetings prior to official action must allow public comment of residents and taxpayers. Okay, so that is somewhat limiting, because that means you can't have someone coming in from the adjoining township and asking to address the board during public comment. You can say, no, we are limiting this to only residents and taxpayers. They have the right to comment on any issues that are or may be before the board prior to any pertinent votes. Now, what's problematic here, depends on your point of view, is that word may. Because under the Statutory Construction Act, may also means may not, and it opens it up so that even though the board may be getting ready to vote on one thing, someone can stand up during public comment and complain about the potholes on their street, okay, or anything else that might be on their mind that may, quote unquote, come up before the board. Now, I'll talk about a best practice here with the next slide on how many agencies are dealing with this. The board can establish reasonable rules for public comment. Most commonly is time limits. Everyone gets 3 minutes to address the board. You can also appoint spokespersons. Okay, so let's say we've got an important issue coming up tonight, and a big group comes in. They're all wearing the same t-shirts, and they all sign up for public comment. There is nothing preventing the board president from going over to that group and saying, look, in the interest of time and making sure we don't hear a lot of repetition, would you be willing to appoint a spokesperson to cover all your points? And you know what? We'll give them 10 minutes. Okay, what do you feel about that? And they say, well, yeah, that sounds reasonable. Okay, we'll do that. And when it comes to time limits, the board can pass a policy or a resolution saying we're going to give everybody 3 minutes. But let's say there's an important issue that comes up tonight. Legally, you can set the rules aside using Robert's Rules of Order or whatever other rules you have to say, tonight we're going to grant everybody 5 minutes, okay? The board has flexibility to establish reasonable rules for controlling its meetings, all right? And these are just some examples that I'm giving you. And then there's specific versus general comments. Let's talk about that. Oops. What some municipalities have done is establish 2 comment periods. The first comment period is where you're allowed to comment on what we're getting ready to vote on, okay? The subject at hand. And then the second comment period, which is usually held towards the end of the meeting, is for general issues where we cover those issues that may come up before the board, where the guy can stand up and complain about the potholes on his street. Okay? There's nothing in the Sunshine Act that says you have to do this, but rather it's only a suggestion that maybe you want to look at this as a possible solution to streamlining your comment periods. Okay, and we view it as a best practice here. But like I said, there's no legal basis that requires you to do this. It's only a suggestion that you take a look at it as a possible solution. Okay, I promised earlier to talk about executive sessions. Executive sessions are gatherings of the board out of the public eye to discuss sensitive issues. They can be held before, during, or after an open meeting, or the board can announce that we're going to have an executive session at a future date and time. However, that announcement that the board has met or is meeting in executive session must be made in a public setting. Okay, so if you're going to meet an executive session at a future time, you must announce that during a public meeting. When you make that announcement, whether it be before or after the fact, you have to give a complete reason as to why you met in executive session. This is based on case law, the case being the City of Reading versus the Reading Eagle, which is the local newspaper down there. And what it says, reading the court decision, is that, again, this common sense test, you must give sufficient reason so that a member of the public can determine that you're meeting privately out of the public eye for a valid reason. So what you cannot say is what they were doing is we're going into executive session for personnel reasons. Okay, that's not enough. You could say, for instance, just an example that I'm pulling out of my hat here, is that we're going into executive session to discuss possible disciplinary action against one of our employees for breaking a work rule. Okay, that is sufficient reason. Or we're going into executive session to meet with our solicitor to discuss litigation that has been filed in county court. You know, here's the docket number. Okay, sufficient information that I, as a citizen, know, okay, this sounds legit. Okay, you're going into executive session for a valid reason. Now, there's no requirement that you keep minutes for an executive session, and if you do keep minutes, they are not subject to disclosure under the right to know law. There is an exemption that removes those minutes from public disclosure. You can't take any official action during an executive session. Any decision that's made during an executive session must be memorialized with a vote in public session. So let's say that you meet in executive session to discuss potential disciplinary action. You know, you hear everybody out, due process and the like, and the board decides, yeah, it's appropriate that we suspend this employee for 3 days. So you come out of executive session, you reconvene the public session, and then you must take a vote saying, we are suspending this employee for 3 work days. Okay, that way it becomes part of the public record as to how the board, you know, what they resolve to do as a result of the executive session. So any official action must occur in a public meeting, not in executive session. Otherwise, that would prove to be a violation. All right, why do you meet in executive sessions? Well, the law lists these reasons. Personnel matters such as hiring, firing, discipline. It must relate to individual positions or people, okay? If you cannot go into executive session to discuss our leave policy or amending our work rules, okay, that is appropriate for a public session. But if you are talking about a specific individual or a specific position that we are hiring for, that you can discuss in executive session. Discussing labor negotiation, where, you know, union shop, We're getting ready to discuss contract talks. You can discuss strategy in executive session. Purchasing, leasing, or selling of property. If you read the act, it doesn't say selling, but there is an unpublished Commonwealth Court decision that says, yeah, you can discuss selling of property in executive session. Consulting with counsel, our solicitor about litigation. Avoid violating privilege or confidentiality. Okay, privilege, we're talking about attorney-client privilege here. So you're in public session, one of your members says something, the solicitor's eyes get real big. We need to go into executive session, okay? And I'm going to provide you with legal advice so that, we don't violate privilege. Okay, you can do that. Discussing university admission standards. I don't know, I wasn't around in 1950 when they added this. To discuss emergency preparedness like Homeland Security and the like, okay? That you can meet in executive session. All right, moving on. Violations. What if someone thinks you're violating the Sunshine Act? Well, there's a couple things that you need to be aware of. First offhand, during a meeting, any member of the public can stand up and say, I think what you're doing right now is a violation of the Sunshine Act. Okay, they are not out of order. They can do that, but then they sit down and then the board decides if that has any merit or not. Now, if the board does say, you know what, thank you, I think you're right. I think we did inadvertently violate the Sunshine Act by what we just did here. They can cure it right there. They can cure their own perceived violations. And perhaps it could be, you're right, we didn't vote on this issue, or we didn't allow public comment. Okay, we're going to do that now and then go back and vote again. Okay, that is called a cure, and they are allowed to do that. Now, what if they decide, well, no, we don't think we have violated the Sunshine Act. Thank you for your comment, but respectfully, we're going to move on. Now, if that person still believes that they did violate the act, within 30 days, they can go to the appropriate court. If it's a local agency, they go to their county court of common pleas and they can file a complaint and ask for legal relief because of the violation. That legal relief can be in the form of an injunction, declaratory relief, or whatever. And they can ask the court to act accordingly as long as they do it within 30 days of the perceived violation of the meeting. Or it can be up to a year after the perceived violation if they first found out about it. But we don't want to get into splitting hairs here. Okay, so within 30 days, you go to court. Now, the judge usually elects to have a hearing where he brings the parties in. This is where you face that straight face test, right? Where you explain to the judge why you did what you did. Okay, if the judge agrees with you, okay, no harm, no foul. Okay, end of hearing. I'm finding that there was not a violation. However, if the judge does determine there's a violation, they have wide leeway in what they can do to address that violation. It can be everything from a slap on the wrist saying, okay, it was a violation, don't do it again. Or they can say, I'm voiding the vote that you took, or I'm voiding all the votes that you took during the meeting. Or they can say, this is so egregious, I'm going to levy sanctions on you. Those sanctions can be a monetary fine up to $1,000 per violation the first time, up to $2,000 the second time. Listen carefully here, because the money, the fine, is not paid by the agency. It's paid by the public official. It comes out of your pocket. Okay, the agency is not legally allowed to pay the fine. So it can get expensive, which is why I say don't try to outthink the Sunshine Act. There was one instance several years ago where it was caught on tape, where a board official said, and we're doing this to avoid the Sunshine Act. Yeah, the judge had fun with that one, let me tell you. Okay. Also in recent history, judges have gotten creative in how they address violations, mainly by saying, in addition to, voiding the meeting or whatever, I'm also going to require that you get Sunshine Act training. Okay, and some of them they have sent to the Office of Open Records. Others they've said, you need to just get training. And there are other outfits out there that will provide the training. Okay, interesting development lately, but a couple courts, a couple judges have done this. Okay. And then let's finish up with just some miscellaneous points here. Okay, all public meetings must be memorialized with meeting minutes where it records the board members who attended and who voted for and against. Okay, if there's a roll call vote, normally you can just say the board approved or the board, voted down this particular issue. But if there is a roll call vote, then the minutes must reflect how each board member voted. The public can record public meetings and they don't have to tell you that they're doing that, okay? I can, as a member of the public, set my cell phone on record, put it in my pocket, walk into your meeting and never tell you. And I have not violated the Sunshine Act, nor have I violated Pennsylvania's wiretap law. Now, what I recommend is that the president of the board, when they are calling the meeting to order and having announcements, they can say something to the effect, or they should say something to the effect, by the way, it may be possible that someone is recording this public meeting. There is no expectation of privacy, and that can happen. And if by chance the agency is recording the meeting, which many of them do, actually most of them do, they can announce that this meeting is being recorded. The recording is a public record subject to disclosure under the Pennsylvania Right to Know law, as well as the minutes, okay? They are considered public records and must be released in response to someone filing a right to know request for either a copy of the recording or a copy of the minutes. Okay, so we are at the end of the presentation. Thank you for your patience with the sound issues that we're having. We'll check those out. But if you have any further questions, now's a good time to get them in. If we, after the session, if anything comes up, like I said earlier, just reach out to our office. There are administrative staff who can help you out, answer your questions. If you come up with something where you've stumped them, they will refer you to legal staff. And someone will get back to you, usually within 24 hours. Take a look at our website, because in addition to all this information about the Right to Know law, there is also a page on there with details about the Sunshine Act and FAQ and lots of other helpful information. But lots of guides on there, lots of good information, training videos and the like, and I think you'll find them very helpful. If you have any training issues where you want to have training specific to your organization, again, reach out and we can have online sessions or live sessions. Okay, we're more than happy to pair with your organization to meet your needs. Okay, but it doesn't look like we have any further questions. Thank you for your kind comments here. I'm glad we were able to help you out. Lots of good questions today. And thank you very much. And, have a good week. Stay warm. And within 2 weeks from now, we'll have another session. Take care, folks. Signing off. And we'll see you on the flip side. Yeah, thank you. I am feeling better. It sounds a lot worse than it is.